Welcome to the Horrifying Obsession channel, where we explore chilling stories and horrifying cases that have shocked the public. Today, we will take you back to December 2005 in a northern Vietnamese city where a brutal dismemberment case shook the community. Join us as we delve into the details of this haunting case, from its discovery to the final days of the perpetrator before facing justice. Prepare yourself for a thrilling and terrifying journey. In December 2005, the city of Lang Son was shrouded in the bleak, cold atmosphere of a northern winter. The biting cold winds blowing from China made everything more still and silent than ever before. This city is famous for its majestic limestone mountains, vast pine forests, and the Ki Kung River winding through the center, dividing the city into two distinct parts. For the people of Lang Son, the Ki Kung River is not just an important water source, but also a symbol of the city, where many community activities take place, such as markets, traditional festivals, and romantic strolls for couples. Winter in Lang Son not only brings a biting cold, but also covers the city in a thick fog in the early morning. The ancient houses with their red-tiled roofs, winding cobblestone streets, and bustling shopping districts all seem to sink into a deep sleep, waiting for the sun to awaken them. While life here is bustling during the day, it becomes eerily quiet when night falls, with only the faint glow of streetlights illuminating the paths. Pham Van Dong, 55 years old, is one of the longtime residents of Lang Son. Born and raised here, Mr. Dong has been closely tied to this city since childhood, witnessing its changes over the decades. Mr. Dong is a tall, slender, middle-aged man with white hair and a kind face. He lives with his wife and two children in a small house deep in a quiet alley, just a few hundred meters from the Ki Kung River. Although retired, Mr. Dong still maintains his habit of getting up early to exercise every day. For him, the early morning is the best time to immerse himself in nature, listen to the birds singing, feel the cold seep into his skin, and breathe in the fresh air. Every morning, he wakes up at 4:30, brews a hot pot of tea, sips a few cups, and then starts his usual walk along the Ki Kung River. The path that Mr. Dong walks every day is not just a trail, but a repository of countless memories, from his childhood to adulthood. He remembers every tree, every stone, and even the old friends who also had the habit of getting up early like him. However, this winter, he sensed something different, a small change he couldn't explain, but it made him feel uneasy and anxious. On the morning of December 10, 2005, as usual, Mr. Dong got up early. Wearing a thick coat and wrapping a scarf tightly around his neck, he gently pushed open the old wooden door and took a deep breath of the cold morning air. The sky was still dark, with only a few distant stars twinkling. Mr. Dong took slow steps on the cobblestone path leading to the Ki Kung River, a route he had walked thousands of times throughout his life. As he approached the area under the overpass, where the riverbank opens up to a vacant lot overgrown with wild grass, Mr. Dong accidentally kicked something hard underfoot. He stopped, looked down, and saw a black plastic bag lying on the roadside. At first, he thought someone had carelessly discarded trash. Being a person who values cleanliness and dislikes seeing litter, he bent down to pick up the bag to dispose of it properly. However, as soon as he touched the bag, he felt something heavy, uneven, and very unusual inside. His heart started to race, and a shiver ran down his spine, as a bad omen seemed to warn him of something sinister. He lifted his hand to see blood on his glove. Panic surged through him, and he immediately dropped the bag and stepped back a few paces. Terrifying images and dreadful theories about what might be inside the black bag began to form in his mind. Mr. Dong, still trembling, took out his phone, his hands still stained with blood, and called the police, his voice quivering with fear. About 15 minutes after receiving the emergency call, the Lang Son City Police, led by Lieutenant Colonel Nguyen Van Min, arrived at the scene. It was a foggy morning, with the flashing lights of police cars cutting through the thick mist, creating a ghostly and cold atmosphere. The police quickly cordoned off the area, erecting barriers to keep curious onlookers at bay. The sound of police sirens, the crackling of walkie-talkies, and the beams of flashlights sweeping back and forth made the air tense and suspenseful. Mr. Dong, the first person to discover the bag, still stood there, his face pale and horrified. The police reassured him and took him into a car to get his initial statement. He recounted everything in fragmented sentences, but it was enough for the police to understand that this was no ordinary incident. Under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Min, the forensic team at the scene began to examine the black plastic bag. They donned gloves and carefully opened the bag with a sharp knife. Immediately, a foul stench of decay and blood filled the air, causing everyone nearby to recoil and cover their noses. The smell of blood and decomposition began to spread, making many feel nauseous. What appeared before them was a horrifying sight. The head of a woman with long black hair, matted with dried blood. The victim's face was so disfigured that it was unrecognizable, but the fear and pain she had experienced before her death were still visible. This bag containing the head was just one part of a much larger tragedy, and everyone realized they were dealing with a dismemberment case, a cruel and inhumane crime that would haunt anyone who witnessed it. Immediately after discovering the head, the police decided to expand the search along the Kikung River and under the highway overpass. They divided into small teams, using flashlights, probes, and specialized equipment to search every nook, cranny, bush, and rock. The search scene became even more eerie as curious residents began to gather around the cordoned-off area, creating a chaotic scene amidst the fog, flashing lights, and murmurs of speculation. The police knew that time was of the essence. If they didn't quickly find the other parts of the body, they could be swept away by the river, or worse, disappear forever, making the investigation much more difficult. Everyone worked at a high intensity, despite the biting cold and the terror that hung over them. After nearly 2 hours of searching, they discovered a total of 8 other black plastic bags scattered along the riverbank. Each bag contained a different part of the victim's body, including legs, arms, and other body parts. All had been brutally severed, indicating that the perpetrator acted with cruelty and was determined to conceal the crime. These bags contained not only the remains of the victim, but also valuable evidence that could help the police trace the murderer. The body parts were immediately taken to the provincial hospital morgue for forensic examination. The forensic doctors worked tirelessly, knowing that with each passing hour, the chances of gathering evidence from the body would diminish. They began by determining the victim's age, gender, and identifying characteristics. Through the examination, the forensic doctors identified the victim as a young woman, about 24 years old, with a height of around 1.65 meters. The cuts on the body indicated that the perpetrator had used a knife and possibly a small saw to dismember the body. The wounds were uneven, some deep, others shallow, suggesting that the killer was not skilled in handling a body. This led to speculation that the dismemberment might have been done in a state of panic, or the killer may have lost control during the act. The doctors also found signs that the victim had been suffocated before being dismembered. There were no indications that she had been strangled, but she might have been forcibly suffocated by having her nose and mouth covered. The bruising on her neck and other parts of her body clearly showed that she had fought desperately before her death. The victim's body also bore many signs of sexual assault, with severe bruises and injuries on her chest and thighs. Another important detail was the small pieces of skin found under the victim's fingernails, indicating that she had scratched the perpetrator in a struggle to defend herself. This could provide the killer's DNA, helping the police to identify him. These traces were immediately sent to the forensic lab for analysis. With preliminary results from the autopsy, the police began reviewing recent missing persons reports throughout Langson province and neighboring areas. They focused particularly on cases of missing young women with similar physical characteristics to those identified from the body. It wasn't long before a missing persons report from a family in Dongdung town, about 20 kilometers from Langson city, caught the attention of the police. Mrs. Hank, the mother of a young woman named Winthi Lan, reported that her daughter had been missing since the evening of December 8th. Lan was a literature teacher at a secondary school in Dongdung. She lived with her mother in a small house and led a relatively secluded life, with little contact with outsiders. Mrs. Hank recounted that on that evening, Lan told her she was going to meet an old friend who had just returned from abroad, but since then, she had not received any calls or messages from her daughter. This made her extremely worried, and she searched everywhere before deciding to report it to the police. When the police invited the family to identify the body, they were devastated to confirm that the remains belonged to Lan. Her mother nearly fainted on the spot upon seeing what was left of her daughter. The scene at the morgue was haunting, not just for the family, but for everyone present. After identifying the victim as Nguyen Thi Lan, the police began to focus on understanding her life, relationships, and habits. They questioned her family, friends, and colleagues to gather information about anyone who might have had a motive to commit such a crime. Lan was described as a very simple, gentle person who rarely had conflicts with anyone. Her work mainly involved teaching and participating in charity activities. She didn't have an official boyfriend, but there were a few male friends she kept in touch with regularly. Among them was a man named Trun Hui, a former colleague who had confessed his feelings to Lan but was rejected. Hai was described as a rather rough man with a somewhat intimidating appearance and occasional violent tendencies in his behavior. These details led the police to start suspecting Hui and investigating him further. The police also looked into the places Lan frequently visited, including coffee shops, friends' houses, and the extra classes she taught. However, there were no signs indicating that she was in danger beforehand. Nevertheless, one noteworthy clue was Lan's habit of taking evening walks near the school where she taught. This led to the theory that she might have been attacked while walking or lured by someone she knew. The investigation continued, with hopes that Lan's relationships would provide more clues to identify the killer. Information from her colleagues, students, and friends gradually revealed that she had encountered a few individuals with unusual behavior, and it was possible that one of them could be the perpetrator. But to pinpoint exactly who was responsible for Lan's brutal murder, the police needed to work meticulously, analyzing every small detail and leaving no stone unturned. Once the victim's identity was confirmed, the forensic team continued to delve deeper into the analysis of the evidence collected from the scene and the body. Dr. Nguyen Duc Thien, a renowned expert in the field, personally led the team performing the autopsy. He discovered that the cuts on Lan's body were highly irregular. Some were deep, while others were shallow, indicating that the killer was not a professional in dismembering bodies. The traces at the scene and on the victim's body were carefully analyzed. Fingerprints, bite marks, and skin samples found under Lan's nails were sent for DNA analysis. The results showed that the DNA did not match anyone in the police database, raising suspicions that the killer might be someone without a criminal record or someone from outside the typical investigative scope of the police. What was even more striking were the injuries on Lan's neck. There were deep bruises, but no signs of strangulation. The forensic doctors believed that she was suffocated by some other method, possibly by having her nose and mouth covered, which cut off her air supply without leaving significant external injuries. Based on the initial information and the autopsy results, the police began expanding their investigation to include people close to the victim. The first suspect was Trun Hui, the man whose advances Lan had rejected. Hui had a history of a quick temper and had had conflicts with several colleagues, but he insisted that he had nothing to do with Lan's death. During the investigation, the police discovered that Hui frequently visited late-night bars and had complicated relationships with many women. However, the evidence the police gathered from Hui was insufficient to charge him. The police decided to temporarily remove Hui from the list of suspects, but continued to monitor him to ensure no leads were overlooked. Next was Nguyen Van Tuan, a colleague of Lan's. Tuan was a quiet, introverted person, but some colleagues noticed that he seemed to have a special interest in Lan. When summoned, Tuan appeared anxious and uncomfortable, which raised the police's suspicions. They began to investigate Tuan's personal life more thoroughly, especially his relationships outside of work. The police decided to search Tuan's home and found some of Lan's personal belongings, including a notebook she often carried with her. When questioned about this, Tuan claimed that Lan had left it behind after a work-related visit to his house. However, His explanation did not convince the police, and they kept Tuan on their list of suspects for further observation. With growing suspicions, the police decided to revisit the crime scene to search for more evidence. They realized that the black plastic bags containing Lan's remains were not placed randomly, but seemed to be arranged deliberately. Analyzing the tracks at the scene, the police noticed strange footprints, although faint, suggesting that they belonged to someone with a small stature. They also found several strands of hair caught in the grass near where the body was discovered. These strands were sent for analysis, and the results showed that they did not belong to Lan, but to another person, possibly the perpetrator or someone connected to the crime. A crucial lead emerged when the police visited a small grocery store near where Lan often went. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Nguyen Thị Mai, recalled that a few days earlier, she had sold a large butcher knife and a handsaw to a very frightening-looking man. He had a large scar on his face and cold, menacing eyes that she couldn't forget. The police immediately took detailed statements from Mrs. Mai and collected information about recent transactions. Another customer, Phan Van Bin, who happened to be at the store at the time, provided a more detailed description of the stranger. This description matched that of Dong Hu Min, a man living not far from Lan's home, who had a criminal record for domestic violence. As the police dug deeper into Min's background, they discovered he had a dark past. Min had once been a truck driver, but was fired due to violent and uncontrollable behavior. He lived a solitary life, rarely interacting with others, and had complicated relationships with those around him. The police began monitoring Min and noticed his peculiar habits. He frequently traveled at night, avoiding the eyes of his neighbors, and always seemed to carry a large bag. Min's behavior further convinced the police that he might be involved in Lan's murder. With the evidence gradually mounting, the police decided to arrest Min for further investigation. When apprehended, Min did not panic. Instead, he remained calm and composed. However, when confronted with undeniable evidence, Min began to lose his composure, and under intense interrogation, he eventually confessed to all his crimes. Min admitted that he had become obsessed with Lan from the first time he saw her at a nearby cafe. He had stalked her for weeks, planning to kidnap and carry out his brutal actions. On the night of December 8th, when Lan was on her way home after meeting friends, Min blocked her path, dragged her into his truck, and took her to an abandoned warehouse nearby. At this warehouse, Min raped and killed Lan. After she died, he dismembered her body and placed the parts into plastic bags, then drove to the overpass to dispose of them. Min believed that by doing this, he would never be caught. But he hadn't anticipated that the police would quickly find clues leading to him. After Min's confession, the police continued to search for additional evidence to complete the case file. They returned to the scene where Min claimed to have killed Lan and found some of her personal belongings, including her mobile phone and a small handbag. These items were sent for analysis to verify the authenticity of his confession. Additionally, the police discovered the knife and hand saw that Min used to dismember the victim, both still stained with blood. These blood samples were tested and matched Lan's DNA, further solidifying the case against Min. The investigators also collected surveillance footage from the toll stations that Min had driven through on the night of the crime. Although the footage was not clear, it was enough to confirm his movements that night. These pieces of evidence were the final puzzle pieces, closing the case on this haunting crime. On January 24, 2006, Dong Hu Min's trial took place at the Langson Provincial People's Court. The event attracted widespread attention from the public, both within and outside the province, due to the brutal and barbaric nature of the crime. Min was charged with serious offenses: kidnapping, rape, murder, and dismemberment. Throughout the trial, Min remained completely cold, showing no remorse for his actions. He calmly confessed to all his crimes, which only fueled public outrage. The defense attorneys tried to find ways to mitigate Min's sentence, but to no avail. The evidence and Min's confessions were too clear and irrefutable. In the end, Dong Hu Min was sentenced to death for his crimes. The verdict was delivered with the unanimous approval of the court and the satisfaction of the public. Min was transferred to prison to await his execution, scheduled for November 5th, 2006. The case of Dong Hu Min not only left an indelible mark of pain on the victim's family, but also caused a major shock in the Langsun community. People in the region became more vigilant, always fearing potential dangers that could arise at any time. The family of Nguyen Thi Lan, especially her mother, Mrs. Nguyen Thi Hunt, fell into despair after the loss of her daughter. Mrs. Hunt couldn't accept the reality that her daughter had died in such a horrific way. She sank into depression, her health deteriorated, and eventually the family had to move away to escape the painful memories in Langsun. The story of this case became a stark warning to many, especially women, about the importance of self-protection against lurking dangers. Many social organizations, schools, and local agencies organized programs to educate the public about personal safety, equipping people with the necessary skills to protect themselves. The case of Dong Hu Min has come to a close, but its echoes still linger. It serves as a reminder of the cruelty that can exist even in communities that seem the most peaceful, and the importance of vigilance in protecting oneself and those around us. Thank you for joining Horrifying Obsession in this harrowing story. The dismemberment case in Langsun is not only a horrific crime, but also a cautionary tale about the dangers that can lurk in everyday life. We hope that through this story, you will be more vigilant, learn how to protect yourself and others around you. Stay tuned to the channel for more thrilling and terrifying cases. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any content from Horrifying Obsession. See you in the next story.